You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Wiener. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. You know how sometimes you start a conversation or have a conversation with somebody that you really love, and you start in one place and you don't know where it's going to go, but you know it's going to go somewhere good? This is the conversation that I had today with our guest. It was just this beautiful unfolding of everything we needed to say that I didn't even really have very much planned, which I don't for most of these interviews, but today was pretty extraordinary. So I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest today, who's been a friend of mine for a while. Like many of the folks on the show, she is one of my favorite people, but her name is Monique Coleman. And you probably know Monique as an actor, a writer, philanthropist, a speaker. She's most known for playing the character of Taylor Mckessie on High School Musical, the original. I know High School Musical has been like a sub-theme for my podcast this year. It's just that all good roads intersect with that world. But Monique and I met a while ago because we both speak quite a bit on the female empowerment circuit. I don't think there's been an empowerment conference worth its salt that hasn't had Monique as a speaker, a panelist, or a moderator. I've worked with her a ton in this arena. She is deeply dedicated to the empowerment and well-being and liberation for girls all over the world, focusing a lot on self-esteem, self-confidence, education, advocacy, and equity. You're going to hear this in the conversation as it unfolds today. Monique is a deeply spiritual, insightful, introspective, and I find very kind-hearted thinker. She's absolutely on a journey of self-discovery and of personal empowerment. It's partially where we really intersect. We just share a language. We share a passion around this. But this conversation and why it was so special, and it kind of just felt like it unfolded the way it was supposed to, was I feel like we were tapping into some truths, some unspoken truths about death and grief and loss, but not just of the physical nature, of the grief and loss and death of what's happening around us in the world, in the systems that we have become accustomed to, in challenging our own place in the world. But the place in this conversation that I felt so excited by, and that I can't wait for you to hear about, is the conversation about our childhood and the traumas and the experiences that we have as children, how we grow up and kind of use that as a theme to navigate our adulthood. This is a big part of We're All Gonna Die Anyway, and the idea of a good life. The fact that we design a life that we want to live on our own terms, but that doesn't come without really looking at our past, at what we're here to overcome, at what we're here to learn, and then we can go and begin anew. And so this conversation with Monique really lit me up. I know it's going to inspire you, especially right now, especially at a time where we're having difficult and deep conversations with ourselves, with the people in our life, and if you're a parent, with the children in your life, about what matters and about how to take care of ourselves and how to remember that we ultimately matter in the end, to preserve and protect our own self-confidence, self-esteem, and belonging by connecting and relating to others. So this conversation is a true delight. I'm so excited for you to get to see more and hear more of my friend Monique Coleman. Let's dig in. I think in some ways, although the world has obviously been so bizarre and untenable lately, when I get to see my favorite people in this format, I think it gives me this great excuse to spend time with the people I love the most, talking about the deepest things during this time. I was not planning on this, as many of us were not.
Exactly. No, I know. I see your face and my heart like warms up, my face gets hot, and I'm just like, I feel like this rush of all the things I want to say and all the things that we've missed. And,
I know.
through social media, I'm grateful that we can keep up, to some extent, but it's just such a fraction of what's actually going on. So I'm so grateful.
I know. And you and I, what I really appreciate about our friendship, and this happens a lot in my truer, I'll say my more grounded relationships, not truer, but my grounded ones, is that we always acknowledge, like, a lot of time can go by and we know things are okay. Like, the amount of time which passes is not in proportion to like how much I love you, adore you, want to see you. And we have that kind of friendship where we kind of pick back up. And I'm excited for this conversation because most of the times we're very much in sync with some of the life lessons that we're learning.
Absolutely. I find that's how it is with our soul people,
Yep.
right?
I
You're like,
know.
oh, wow. In that time while we were away, oh, girl, I learned this. Oh, I learned this too.
I
It's
know.
just, yeah, it feels like we're all part of this bigger cosmic thing that's
Which is
happening.
exactly why I wanted to talk to you on this program, because, I launched this podcast right in the middle of this pandemic, still ongoing. Had no idea that I would have been propelled into my own season of grief, talking about death and loss as we were looking at it globally, experiencing it personally with my own family and with Felipe's family, losing relatives and loved ones to COVID, losing animals that we love. Like, it's been this really
Mm,
uncanny time of loss. And yet I'm reminded that when we as artists take a risk to explore a subject matter that we can intellectualize and we think we've got
right.
under control, it ends up living inside of us, being inside of us. And I don't find any, I mean, I understand the irony that I took on this topic and then would live through this, because this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to explore the taboo issue of death and loss, but also of living and living urgently, and
Mm.
like what it forces us to kind of look like. So, anyway, I'm excited to dig in, because that's been the big gap since I think we last connected
Yeah.
is this new conversation. So in most of these conversations, some of these things I know about you, but some I don't. So I'm excited to discover it. Will you tell me, so I want to kind of do like a full picture of Monique, and your life and your journey and the themes that you're learning and how this all intersects. But do you know anything about your birth? Do you have a birth story that you know? Like, where were you born? What was the
Oh,
birth like
wow.
for your mom? Do you
Oh
know?
my gosh. What a great question. um, I apparently was easy. Yeah, it was like my mom was 19 when she had me. Yeah, and apparently it was quick. She was able to zip up her jeans and walk out of the hospital.
No
I
way.
mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like that literal, like that day, but the story is just that I was ready. I mean, I was 2 days late. I was supposed to be born on 11/11, and I was born on 11/13 instead. So I was
Wow.
like, hold on, I know I'm gonna be powerful, but like not that powerful.
You were already learning how to make an entrance back then.
I was like, give me a second, Ma. I'm not ready. Hold on. I need 2 more days in the womb.
But even 2 days is pretty easy, I understand, from a lot of moms. So
Yeah. So I was just like, I apparently was ready. And my mom didn't have some, big story. I want to ask her now that you've said this, I'm interested in
yeah.
seeing if there's any details that I've missed. Yeah.
I always like hearing people's birth stories, because I feel like sometimes it can foreshadow some of the themes that they experience in their life. And so what's interesting that comes up for me when you say that, from what you know, is it was easeful and it was on your own
Yeah.
timing.
Yeah. Now, what I will say is that by the time I was 6, I'd been hit by a car.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Can you
Yeah, I
tell
don't
me a little
talk
bit
about it
about
a
this?
lot.
No?
Yeah, I don't talk about it a lot. Yeah, I was hit by a car when I was 6 years old in New York City. I lived in Jamaica, Queens, and so as easy as I came into the world, I was very much confronted with my own mortality and the reality that of just impermanence, and that is I now see it as the source of so much of my strength,
Mm.
creativity, and resilience because I have a lot of memories from that
Do
time. I
you?
remember, yeah, I remember my dreams. I remember sleep paralysis. I broke my femur, so I was in the hospital for like at least 6 months or so, and then I was in a full body cast where I had to actually relearn how to walk. So I was carried out of the hospital in a cast that came
Oh
right
my
underneath
God.
like covered my ribs, covered my entire leg, half of the other leg, and had a bar in between. So I literally was like carried out of the hospital and pretty much felt paralyzed. I wasn't paralyzed, but I didn't have any mobility for a
Wow.
very long time. And once they cut the cast off of me, I got a walker. And so I walked with a little walker at like 6.5 years old, just like me and my walker, because I was too small to actually have crutches. And my earliest memories were of being in I remember one time hearing my family that I was staying with, because my mom wasn't with me during this time. I was with
Okay.
my aunt and uncle who were taking care of me. They offered to help out with my mom because she was so young.
Wow.
So they said, hey, we've raised a lot of kids, we'll help you out, during this time. And in that time I was hit by the car and all these things happened. So I had to relearn to walk. And I remember overhearing them one day, kind of questioning how hard it was for me, like whether I was like really giving it my all. But they didn't know I heard them. And that day I made a decision. And every day when they would leave the house, I would practice, and I would roll myself out of the bed, and I would climb onto the television and pull myself up, which is probably why I'm so strong. Now that I think about it, that's actually the first time I've ever made that connection.
Really?
That I would always be I'd pull myself up, and I would practice walking, and then I'd roll back and I'd get back in the bed. Yeah.
That's so, first of all, thank you for sharing that memory with me,
Yeah.
because I understand how tender that is. And you were so small to be
Yeah.
so in such a traumatic and dramatic incident. And they always say like at around 5 or so is when we start to have memory, or like some people have it younger. So you were
Yeah.
really conscious, you think, of.
Very.
That's incredible. And when you said you can remember, like, what were some of the things that you could remember? I think one, being doubted by family, or understanding that there was a question
Right.
about that, I can understand as a fuel. But do you remember what else was going on in little Monique's head during that time, or your heart during that time?
Yeah. I felt trapped.
Yeah.
I remember going to school over the phone. So while I was in the hospital, I didn't have friends really. There weren't, I didn't like play.
Right.
This is so interesting too, because as the words are coming out of my mouth, I'm having revelations about my personality that make a lot more sense now. I just got my chart read yesterday, just so
Mm,
happens. And one of the things that we discovered is that my chiron, or my soul wound, is in the area of self-expression, and part of that is play. And I just now connected as well that as a
God.
child, I missed out on a lot of play. Life got very serious very quickly,
Yes.
and then play got very constructive very
Right.
like after that.
Right.
Um but I remember, yeah, I remember my dreams being very dark. I remember kind of feeling like I was sitting on a ledge, and I would just like fall in my dreams, and that's how I would wake up. I would have this like sinking feeling, and it would wake me up. Or I would feel like I was in the dark, and I was trying to claw my way
Wow.
back into consciousness. And I remember that. I had a neighbor who, her name was Eileen Benjamin, and I called her Miss Benji, and I would cry out for her, and I would be able to hear it in my own head, but I couldn't reach it. It was like I would just, like, I would become conscious while I was asleep,
Yeah.
and it was like this paralysis, and I would just like kind of claw my way back to life constantly. And it would make me I was afraid to sleep. I never wanted to go to
Of
sleep, because I
course.
was always afraid that when I would go to sleep, I was afraid I wasn't going to wake up. Very young.
There are so many things that I'm thinking about, but you said it best, which is that there is always a correlation to our childhood wounds and to our adulthood pursuits and passions and what shapes us, right? We don't escape any of that. Nor when
No.
we're that little could you have ever planned any of that. But to
No.
think about the resilience, the strength, the fortitude that you develop at such a young age, coupled with the isolation and the trauma, obviously, of going through something so major in your body. And just as somebody who knows and loves you and looks a little bit at your life like most people from the outside in, the fitness, the physicality, the physical
Right.
expression takes on a whole new meaning now in your life. Because that's what I
Yeah.
think you're also known for, is this
Yeah.
embodiment of strength.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because when I was about 9 or 10, that's when I started dancing.
Hmm.
And so a few years later, I, go back home to South Carolina. So this all happened in New York, in Jamaica, Queens. I moved back in with my mother, and I had a third grade teacher, God bless her soul, named Miss Tanya Jones. And I was a very chatty kid and just couldn't quite sit still. And Miss Jones said, I really think your daughter is an artist, and she needs an outlet. You should put her in piano or dance or something. And so my mom put me in everything.
Wow.
And dance was the one that I loved the most, but it also caused me the most grief,
Mm.
because every time I would flex my thigh, I would cry, because it was like I would get this rush of emotion and feeling. And then what it did was it caused me to shut that part of myself down. And I didn't actually reawaken it for 20 more years. So what happened was I created this like energetic shield around that part of me, where that was an off limits part, so much so that I would end friendships, I would end relationships. If I said, do not touch me there, and you did, we were done, because it was such a big feeling that caused me so much pain, and yet so much, like, I had so much strength. So by the time I was 10, 11 years old, I was on point. They, you know, I had these like super thighs. And so they were like, she's so strong. And it wasn't anything I ever talked about. I just kept going, because I was like, I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me.
Yeah.
I had this, like, I don't want pity, I'm over it. And at 29 years old, I had a massage therapist work on me one day. And I was like, I would always go to massage and I'd say, hey, they say, is there anything you don't want worked on? Which they don't really do that as much anymore. It's like, what would you like? Now I'd say, hey, just so you know, this area, because I still have a scar. So this area, make sure you don't touch that. And I had someone say to me, I think that's actually where I'm supposed to go. And he taught me about trauma in the body and how we store these things. And he said, I'm not touching you with any more firmness than I am the other leg. This is emotional. And if so, I would like permission. And he didn't charge me for this. Like this, wow. He said, I believe that it is actually my part of our soul contract. I believe I'm supposed to help you release this. And in that, I remember that experience so vividly, because I feel like I had to re-experience the trauma one more time. I had to feel it all just once. I had to feel all the pain, the rush of everything that I'd been avoiding. I had to feel it, but I only had to feel it one time as an adult to be able to let it go, because I was now big enough that those, as a kid, that trauma was all trapped there. And I was like, I never wanted to feel that kind of pain again.
Was that
but I had to live through it.
Was that the leg of the femur that you broke?
Yeah. And it was just like trapped in there. Like if you touch, it felt like excruciating pain for some, when people just like squeeze you, like they're teasing you, they poke you, and for whatever reason, people would always like squeeze me, like, don't touch me there. That's off limits. And he went straight there and said, I believe I'm supposed to help you release this. And he did. And
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I said he did it, and it changed my life. It became this understanding. Have you read The Untethered Soul?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And just like how we create these barriers around ourselves, and then we have a barrier to the barrier, and we have to keep sort of building on these things instead of just healing them.
Yes. Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, incredible book. I was going to ask you if you had read The Body Keeps the Score.
I just bought The Body Keeps. Actually, I didn't buy it. Someone sent it to me.
Yes.
They said, you need to read this book. I haven't read it yet.
That book changed my life quite a bit and talks about trauma stored in our body. And it makes total sense. As you tell me this story, you'll find a lot of yourself in those pages, but it's the somatic experience. It is the physical embodiment of the pain that we experience, both physical in your case and emotional. But for many people, they also trap emotional trauma, psychological trauma, and it lands, we all have tension points in our body, but it really helps you understand where your body has kept the memory, the score of our trauma in our life.
Yeah.
So this has really informed quite a pathway for you as a person and a performer then to understand, because I think, I met you kind of in process and in progress of the life that you're living, where you were already exploring these things. Do you think that you were dialed into that at a young age because of this traumatic accident and experience, that you were more connected to trying to understand purpose and reason? And, I don't know. I'm curious if that was a later in life evolution, or if that was also part of your upbringing.
I believe it was always there as I attribute it almost to my birthdays. I always felt old, but as early as I can remember, though. Like, it wasn't something that I was afraid of getting older. I literally felt like, oh my God, I'm 10. I'm never going to be a kid again. I haven't done enough. It was as if I knew that I had a mission, and I knew that there was something I was supposed to do. And I was worried
that you weren't going to get there.
that I was never going to get there. And I remember turning all the, like being like turning 13 and being like, I'm 13 and I'm a teenager, and even now thinking about the way that I have spent so much of the last 10 years working to empower young people, I
Yep.
know that that is a direct correlation, because the purpose that I had on the inside of me at that age, and the feelings that if you could just give me what I need to do what I'm supposed to do, you guys don't know what's going on in here. I see things and I know things that I felt like I couldn't share,
Yep.
that felt like they were trapped in this reality that wasn't really real. Yeah, and so I definitely think that my childhood informed
Mm.
the way that I express and the way that I create now, and the passion that I have for, honestly, liberation.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm working with right now, is this realization that it really all has to do with liberating myself, and ultimately helping to liberate other people.
Yeah. I also hear in your story this ingrained urgency that I think happens when people either experience loss at an early age, or an experience like this, a traumatic experience where it does age you. I also tend to believe, because I was
Mm,
very much relating to your story. I think I was that kind of kid too, Monique, where I was like, I just felt purposeful from an early age. And that can be a heavy burden for a
yeah.
kid who doesn't know then how do you articulate that, or people aren't reflecting that back, or you don't have family who understands that. And it can feel like this, whether it's a creative drive or, for me, it was also a humanitarian piece. I had such a heavy heart for wanting to do more in the world than my little age and body could let me do. And it actually, instead of it like inspiring me all the time, it quite actually depressed me or made me feel
Same.
isolated or alone. Same thing for you?
Very much so, where
Yeah.
it felt like a burden. It felt like,
Yes.
I told this story sometimes about the first time I heard Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice ever. And I thought, my God, like he got all the best words. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to do that. Like, I'm
Mm.
so connected to this man and his voice. And that's like, what do I do?
How
Like,
do I get
how
there?
do I, yeah, how do I get
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
now? But meanwhile, my voice was probably like this.
Right. Well, that gravitas we have to earn, over time too.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
it's so interesting because I think, I mean, I love the whole conversation so far has been a wash and metaphor, which I kind of love because
Mm,
I think one of the blessings we get when we examine our life, when we have the courage to examine our life, is we can look back and pull it apart in these pieces to kind of see these themes, to see these
yeah.
threads, right? Connective tissue that isn't so far away.
Mm,
We're never that far away from our childhood selves ever,
no.
no matter how much we want to be. And trust me, there are tons of times where I'm like, do, I'm done with that. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just a grown up body now who has that little girl inside is like still, still pushing, still hurting, still loving, still
Yeah.
all of that. I was going to ask you, what if you could pick 3 words that would describe your childhood, what 3 words come to mind for you, top of mind?
Top of mind. Whew, first one was painful.
Mm.
The second one was compassion. I had in almost a supernatural level of compassion for the adults around me,
Mm.
and for the inadequacies that I recognized in them, and this ability to not take that personally in some weird way. Um, and oh, serious. I was just I was serious. I was a serious kid. Yeah, I wasn't. I was my. It's so interesting. I was playful outwardly,
Yeah.
but internally there wasn't a lot of inherent joy.
Well, it sounds like at an early stage, a lot of that is taken away from an experience like you had, one in which your main job is to heal, right? And you're not
Right.
able to be as expressive. Plus, not knowing much about the surrounding in which you were being raised in, but to hear adults question, like whether or
Hmm.
not, you're in integrity with your healing is
Right.
like, it is, those are serious things. Even when you said to me right now, you could tap into some of the compassion for the adults around you, maybe some of the missteps or challenges that they were having. Like I really relate to that. But for me, that's been unpacking my codependency with adults my whole life. Because when you're a little kid and you have to grow up faster than you are intended to, and you take on more emotional responsibility than is required for a child. And a lot of times adults do that. Adults, engage in unhealthy ways with kids, making them the savior of the family, the adult of the family, their significant spouse, others of the family. They put a lot of relationship there. And for kids I'll speak for myself. I've been unpacking my own trauma background. We become highly diligent, highly perfectionist, highly driven. We absorb all of the world around us, and we will take care of everything to the
if you could
detriment
read
of our
my
own growth.
journals. If you could read my journals in 3rd grade, all I need to do is dress nice, do my homework, like it was like these lists that I would make of all the things that I need to do to be approved of.
Yes.
All the things that I needed to do to make sure that I fell in line and that I wasn't disruptive, and I look back at my mom and she's a warrior, she's a warrior, incredible woman, but who was 29 with a 10-year-old, and I think back at that and I'm like, whoa, I would at this age, I'd have a 21-year-old, and it's like, what is it?
Yeah.
And to think like you did a great job, but I also really absorbed a lot of her pain, and I absorbed a lot of what she was going through and took that and made that my own, that made that have to do with me very specifically. And that was really challenging to kind of weed through that and recognize the places where, yes, she was doing the very best she could, but also that at times that wasn't what I needed, and to come to terms with that and to be okay.
I think that's the reckoning we have as adult women when we have to look back at our childhoods, and especially our relationships to our mothers, whether they be difficult at certain points, which I think, quite frankly, everybody has, but I think to different degrees. But I think our parents do the best they can potentially with what they have. Doesn't mean that you get what you need as a kid.
Right.
And then we still have to unpack and unravel how to reparent ourselves, and forgive, those things. I mean, you're not the first person on this program, and nor one of my friends that I'm now putting together also had young parents. And, those people tend to be the most sort of evolved, mature, like the ones that you would lean on. But I think in some ways we adopted that as a personality trait as a kid. But I've talked a lot on this show about learning how to remother myself, how to tap into the nurturance, to the tenderness that I don't think was there for me in the way that I really needed it. And that was the best of her ability, but that still didn't give me what I needed. And so
you just said two
things.
Yeah, you just said 2 words that I did not even really come to hear or understand until in my 30s: nurture and tender. When, like, someone said to me a couple of years ago, and nourish. I was like, wait, what? I literally did not know what that meant, to be nurtured. I'm like, you mean like raised, like trained, like my concept of had a little bit of like a, come on, to it, like more of like a coach instead of, it had more of that kind of energy than kindness and compassion and love and gentleness. And I perceived that for the longest time as weakness and being shallow and needy, which is ironic because I actually grew to be very needy. I became more needy in my attempt to become needy adverse and to make sure that everyone knew that I didn't need anything. I actually became even more needy. And because I wasn't being honest about my wants, my needs, I didn't know how to express myself clearly and fully, but my energy did. And now I understand that even no matter what you say or what you think you're putting out, your energy really does speak for you. And my energy was crying out, I think a lot of times, crying out for attention, crying out for validation, and really seeking to be held. Yeah, like when I think back on that time, I don't remember being held in it. I remember I have memories of it, but none of them are of just my face in someone's chest, or my that hug that you then crave, because you know what it feels like. I feel like I craved a hug that I couldn't imagine, and then I, in full transparency, thought that that would come romantically.
Of course.
And so I was looking for someone to make me feel, anytime someone made me feel that way, I
Mm.
thought that that was love.
That's right. I think you're speaking a lot of our stories in some of this, because I think when we've grown up with a deficit of nurturance and tenderness, when we've grown up, I'll speak in my opinion, where I was told by the adults in my life that my needs were too much, that I was too much, it was too much to handle, too emotional, too anything. It later in my life, through a lot of inner work and psychoanalysis and support, did I understand that what that really meant was they didn't feel like they were enough. I wasn't too much.
Mm,
That is an adult's challenge of feeling like they don't have the needs to meet what's coming their way. But little kids, we absorb all those messages adults tell us about ourselves and show us, right? So if there isn't a physical tenderness, of course, we're going to go seek it out in a romantic relationship, or imagine that that's the secret unlock to getting fed like that.
right.
Or if we were told, too selfish, too much, too needy, oftentimes
Right.
it's just like I've been told, like, flip the mirror. That's somebody telling you they don't feel like they can provide, not that
Mm,
your needs are too much, that they don't have what they can provide in that moment.
yeah.
That changed the whole perspective on things I didn't think I got in my childhood.
Yeah. My mother actually also experienced grief very young and big.
Mm.
So she lost two brothers and her father before she was 21.
Oh my gosh.
And so also growing in my compassion and understanding as an adult, looking and realizing that it was kind of natural to keep me a little bit at an arm's length at times because of the deep, deep loss that she experienced. That, and that's where a lot of my empathy and compassion came from. I was aware of this, but I didn't know how that impacted our relationship.
Right.
I was aware that, oh, mama's, you know, wants, she's protecting herself, but I of course I didn't have the words for this. I could just tell that there were ways that she was protecting herself. um and it made, it just made me kind of even needier, like I want you to, but I now understand that some of that was her, how she processes and how she processes grief. And at maybe 8 or 9, she started preparing me for the fact that she wasn't always going to be here, which is very relevant to the show.
Yeah.
Right? My mom at a very young age, she's always, I've like how people are very codependent with their parent. That's like the one codependent relationship I don't have. My mom has, like, from a very young age said, I'm not always going to be here. And you need to be able to live on, you need to be able to live. You need to not need me that way.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what a, what a,
That's
what
a
a
hard
challenging thing to process as a kid. What a gift in some ways as well, because it made it so that at times when I got the message that I knew I needed to leave, or I knew I needed to grow, or I knew I needed to go somewhere, I wasn't too afraid to go.
what's like cohesive in what you're saying is that I could imagine this is what a lot of girls turn to in their quest for perfection, making that list that you had of, if I look like this and if I do this and if I get this done, then I will, please, or then I will get that attention, that hug, that connection. I think so much, you and I are both very steeped in the girls empowerment space and working a lot to get the next generation to recognize some of these lessons at a younger stage, with context, with teaching, right?
Right.
And I think this is the one thing we leave off the table sometimes, is the deep connection between trauma and self-esteem, and the fact that, like, we
Ooh.
go into this, like, deeply, like, we go to, like, beauty, fitness, relationship, all the things we talk to girls about is like, well, once I get this, then I'll get what's, like, missing inside. But if your mom, through grief, locked herself away, and these are my words, not yours, but
Right, right.
emotionally, right? Whoa, emotionally, if there's like a barrier, then of course the young mind, and the young female mind in particular, goes, well, what does the world value for me? How will I get my mom's attention and love? Okay, it's grades, it's manners, it's
Right.
looks, it's this, it's achievements, and then I'll get that connection.
Right. You just spoke a whole word, girl. Like a whole word. That is so true. And I remember very, very specifically one area in particular where I recognized the need to dismantle that. And it
Mm-hmm.
was in the area of love.
Mm.
I remember the moment that I recognized that I had completely adopted my mother's views or perceptions on relationships as my own, and
Ooh.
that I needed to come to grips and terms with what I actually wanted, what I separately believed, to dismantle that and then lay my own foundation on which to build from. And that was one of the most difficult things. I mean, of all the accomplishments I've had, I feel like that's actually the greatest one, was just even coming to that awareness that everything that I was feeling was not my own. And I don't think that that's something that we do discuss, the relationship to
No.
our self-esteem and our trauma, but also the relationship of our experiences to someone else, that
Right.
some of our experiences and points of views and beliefs and ideas and ideals are not ours. And how do we help equip young people to have your own inner compass, to have your own awareness, and self-discovery, that separate of those around us, while not shutting them out in order to discover it.
Right. I think that is the work of the work, Monique. I think that is literally like a lifetime of dismantling for so many of us. And I think in the women's and girls empowerment space, for me, it's been the unspoken dialogue I've been craving the most, which
Mm.
is a mantra will not fill this giant size hole that I have
Ooh,
only. I mean, mantras are tools, but I think
sure.
sometimes because of the way we communicate around empowerment, we've like top 10'd out everything that we're, supposed to be focusing on. And the message, it's what I call SFSN. It sounds fabulous. It signifies nothing. Like I do
Ooh,
not know how to utilize that, because I think what was missing for me was the underneath of it all, which is I think women's empowerment is more than just whether I think I'm pretty or not, or
mm,
whether I love my body the way it is. I mean, look at your relationship to your body in all of the ways it held the trauma, the pain, the fear, the hurt. And I mean, it physically manifested for you. So many of us have that same experience, but we don't have any context to it. So we just think we're wrong or we're bad. There's something wrong
right.
with this physical form. And that's what the book, The Body Keeps the Score, helped me to understand, was that, it was not just an emotional, psychological burden or pain. It, like, our bodies literally carry that. And then of course it will affect the way we feel about our bodies.
Yeah. Wow.
I know it's deep. It's deep because I think I was going to ask you, and I like to ask some of the guests, like, as they go through childhood and into adulthood, what are the themes that they still think they're reckoning with? But I'm hearing in this conversation, these themes are coming to the surface, right? This idea of a
Yeah.
return to play, a return to joyful physicality, a return
Mm,
to nurturing and tenderness, a return to
mm,
mothering in a way that maybe was not able to be provided.
yeah. And I have to bring up something in relation to mothering, because I did become a mother last year very briefly.
Mm,
And that loss is something that's very complicated to uh, explain. The all loss is very difficult to explain, but it's just a very unique one that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I remember this was at a time where I was really shocked about the blessing coming at that moment, because I was coming through. I was on the tail end of a betrayal, a massive betrayal, and um, uh, a loss that really impacted my business and all the things that I cared about. And I was like really in the thick of, like, if I was a boat full of water, I felt like I was like pulling water out with like a little solo cup, like, here I am on this ship and I'm just like solo cupping the water out. And then God blesses me with this child, And I'm like, whoa, that's shocking. But immediately I have this like enormous sense of purpose. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, this is it. This was this. I knew there was a miracle that was coming, and this was the miracle. And then it left, and I was like, okay. And what I came to understand through that experience was that I couldn't make that my purpose. I wasn't supposed to put the burden of my experience on my child. Because I thought to myself, well, then what do I live for? Well, then what's the point?
Right.
Like, what's the point then? Like,
Right.
if this isn't even big enough, then why? Like, what is the point? And then I had this moment where I realized I'm the point. I'm the point.
That's right.
I have to pull myself out of this situation for myself. I have to get better for me. I have to matter. I have to matter enough to myself to face the things that have happened to me, to face my life for me. And when I do that, then I will be open and ready to receive another life. And it was so crazy because at any other time in my life, I would not have really, I don't think, been able to understand that. But it was like I was so open and so raw and so angry and so just like, meh, that through this experience, I was like, I found myself.
Yeah.
And I found myself, and I found my artist again. I got my fight back. I was like, I matter. I really matter. My voice matters. What I have to do matters. What I have to say matters. What I'm meant to express matters. And it matters because it's me.
Right. I just want to take a moment and hold that space for that disclosure, because I think that's tremendously brave still, no matter how much we understand it in our mind. Every time you share that story, you unlock permission for somebody else to understand theirs. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And
Yeah.
when we talk about miscarriage, when we talk about losing children, when we talk about even changing the dynamic of choosing to become a mother or not choosing to become a mother,
Right.
what I hear in your story as well is the opportunity to break generational curses, an opportunity to transform patterns that exist in the systems of our family. Where
Mm,
women in particular, and I'll just speak for women because I think about it in my own relationship to mothering, and I think about it as I hear your story, is that there are opportunities for us on this earth. I love that you said that you needed to be enough, not your role as a mother and your
right.
projected fantasy of what that was going to mean for that child. But if you know what you know, and you could project out how you understood that could impact a child that would come into your life, all of that burden, all of that pressure, all of that misplaced energy that so
Right.
many of us have when we come into the world. Because let's just be really honest, sometimes people have children to fulfill holes in their own life and not because
Yeah.
they are ready to guide a soul on its own journey. They want that soul to be
Right.
their journey. And it is the other third rail besides death that I want to talk about in another series of podcasts, which is about motherhood, femininity, and empowerment, and where
Mm,
there is this unspoken story of both rejecting motherhood, losing opportunities for
mm,
motherhood, the things that we feel like we've got to tie up in a nice, pretty bow. I want to untie that shit,
mm,
because I think
mm-hmm.
what you said resonates so deeply with me and the parents that I talk to, the mothers that I talk to will say the same thing, that what they look at and recognize in their life is that it is not their children's responsibility to live their unfulfilled dreams.
Ooh,
And
ooh,
when we can be aware of that and stop that and change that, we will change an entire generation of girls in this world.
absolutely.
And that burden is a lot to carry, whether you're coming from a family who, you're the first girl to go to school, the first girl to do
Right.
X, Y, or Z. I mean, we want to advocate for those breaking barriers all the time. But I think you and I are aligned in that we also want to teach girls how to love themselves for themselves and not for what they produce in the world.
Wow. That part, whatever that is,
That's correct.
even another human being, because it is separate of you. One of my favorite quotes comes from Khalil Gibran: "Your children are not your children; they come through you, but they are not of you." And I think, moving forward and
Mm,
recognizing the just the divine intelligence of the body and the transference of everything through our cells and through our DNA. I've always known that it's something that I knew I wanted to make sure that I wanted. And in that moment, the want was so clear, but it was still an accident. It wasn't a choice.
Mm.
It was still like oh my God, this surprise that I want this more than I thought I did. That's not the same thing as a choice, a conscious decision to bring another life. I mean, there's over 7 billion of us, almost probably 8 billion of us on the planet right now. The consciousness that I think we need moving forward for ourselves as humanity, as human beings, for the planet, my hope is that more people are making conscious individual choices about life, about death, about our existence and our humanity, because I believe that part of how we've gotten to this place where we've stressed ourselves and stressed our planet, and we're in these little families where we're under so much duress, is
Yeah.
because we haven't taken that step back and said, and really looked at what was ours, what belonged to another, and who and what we really desire in our lives, especially as women.
And I think we get my feeling, and I agree with that larger picture. I also think the ingredient to help us get there is a self-learning, self-compassion, self-exploration that we don't teach women and girls to undergo. We
No.
teach ourselves to be very, and are socialized to be very externally facing,
Mm.
validated by external cues, including a surprise anything, job,
Right.
baby,
Oh my
romance,
God, thank
whatever.
you. Yeah.
Right? Versus, which is not to say those are not, blessings or gifts, gifts to be discarded. But I do think, at least I'm learning and earning in my own wisdom in my life, the fact that everything that values the most to me has nothing to do with material gain. Nothing, which is hard for you and I to have this conversation sitting in Hollywood right now, and you
Sure.
having worked in the industry your entire life, and me working
Sure.
industry in and adjacent to all of this, because we're validated all the time by things that seem great once you achieve X, Y, or Z, this prize, this
Mm-hmm.
award, this money, this role, this body, this whatever. It is an unlearning, to quote the great Rachel Cargle, right? Who
Mm.
talks about it so much around our relationship with race. But I extrapolate her teaching a lot to be anything we've learned that goes against kind of, our societal ingrain. And
Yeah.
be awake right now, to be waking up right now, to be reckoning right now is painful. And it
Very.
needs to be. It is important that it is,
Very.
because
Yeah.
all of the pain that you experienced physically to overcome that deficit, that hurt in your life,
Mm.
right? We are talking about overcoming a deficit you're describing that is generational, it
Mm.
is environmental, it is societal. It affects every system in the world. How dare we think that we will get to that without any sort of sacrifice?
Right. And I love that so much. I also think that our sacrifice doesn't have to be suffering
Mm,
when we do it with each other.
mm,
When we are honest and we say, hey, this is I don't need to, we all are, there's going to be an exchange, but I believe that the suffering happens when we do it in silence.
mm.
The sacrifice is a necessary part of the journey, but we suffer when we don't share that it's what we're going through.
I hear that. I think that's a great addition to that thought, because you're right. The suffering is when we are ashamed and keep it inside and feel like nobody
Right.
else is sacrificing that. And I
Right.
speak of it as this personal sacrifice that I think right now, many of us that choose to are going through, looking at our place and space in the world, in a system that
Mm.
prioritizes some over others, in a, in a world in which I think we're asked to look at our values again, and to
Very
really
much
say
so.
what truly matters, who truly matters, how do I matter in making the change in this way. I'm curious, because we haven't actually touched base outside of the like, hi, hello, I love you, I hope you're okay during the period of time. But what has this pandemic slash larger conversation around racial injustice and systemic
Mm.
violence, how has that been showing up for you personally, professionally? Like, I'm curious to check in on that, as much or as
Yeah.
little as you want to share. It's, I want to know how you're doing.
First of all, thank you. Um, you're just one of my favorite people, truly, for so many reasons.
You know, it's
So, yeah.
funny. There's sirens happening during our conversation, and I always look at sirens as spiritual signs to raise the alarm,
Same.
to make people alert.
Same. And then right at that moment, I got
Yep.
another call, and I was like, wait. Yeah, I just got this new device, and I'm like, don't know how to make it stop
No
dinging. But
worries.
anyway,
It's all good.
um, the thing that I've been dealing with, or coming to understand or question or look at, has been whether or not I was whitewashed. Because I went to a very prestigious private school in South Carolina. I live in Hollywood. I don't come from a silver spoon. I'm not standing on anyone's shoulders to be here, to have what I have. I certainly have struggled in my childhood, adulthood. I have had and lost and had and lost and so forth. And this, particularly the conversation around allyship, has been very particularly strange for me, because I never felt like I needed an ally for my Blackness. I have great friends. I have multicultural friends. I have wonderful friends that I can speak the truth to and that can speak the truth to me. I have relationships that I can be incredibly vulnerable inside of. And if anything, in this time, I've been a very safe space for people who don't have any safe spaces to go, to ask the hard questions and to need an ear. And at the same time, I've looked at the ways that maybe I have not always honored myself
Mm.
in situations, for not realizing that I even should. So for me, it's been a really kind of interesting exploration, entirely recognizing that I hadn't really given it much thought before now,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that it's presenting, particularly with like the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth. I hadn't, and in many ways, I felt like I've benefited from privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I advocate for people. I advocate for anyone who I perceive or who is presenting as underserved or in need of an advocate. Uh, and I it's been it's been an awakening.
Mm-hmm.
It's been an awakening, a personal spiritual awakening, where I've accepted the parts of myself that believe that I live in a skin suit,
Mm.
and that we are more than our bodies, and we are more than our color, and that our adversity is, that we were able to transcend it. I also have been looking at individuals and their pain bodies,
Mm.
in the individual pain body that's speaking on behalf of, and recognizing my own ignorance and education inside of it.
For those
Seeing,
that are listening, can you define pain body so people understand that
I
context?
guess what I mean by that is that sometimes people are speaking from their own trauma, their own very individual trauma. So it's as if I walked around the world and every time I saw a car, or every time I saw someone dealing with an issue relating to physical, their physical well-being, that I jumped at it and made it a thing, So there are people who I find at times, and this is very controversial to say, but I find at times that there are people on the front lines of certain issues who might not be emotionally equipped to
Mm.
have a universal or objective thought about that at this moment, because I feel that hurt people and healed people heal people. And I think there's a lot of hurt people walking around. And I am like, I haven't protested.
Mm-hmm.
I protested in my own ways. I protest by becoming more passionate about young people. I protest by becoming more passionate about my advocacy and making sure that I am doing the things that are advocating in the ways that I know to advocate. Uh, when I was in South Carolina recently, I drove down the street and I saw Lynch's River,
Mm.
and I drove through Lynchburg, and it made me go, okay,
Mm-hmm.
She should run.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just had a different relationship to where I'm from,
Mm-hmm.
and thought, but yet my perspective still has to do with sort of this broader picture of how I can make lasting and sustainable impact and not just be a part of the chorus
Mm-hmm.
right now. And that's very challenging. It is so challenging because so much of this is happening on social media, which
Mm-hmm.
I just feel is a very insecure platform. It cannot, I don't believe that social media can house a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been entirely, I've been riddled with guilt, if I'm honest. I've experienced a lot of guilt, a lot of um, sadness around my own participation or lack thereof at times. I have felt my own judgment. I felt what I call it, I felt the judgment, and then I'm like, no, that's you. Because
Mm-hmm.
unless it's coming from someone else, and they are outwardly telling you, no, that's inside of you being projected, and you're making it that, because there's a lot of people who say silence is violence, and I respect that sentiment. I respect that. But for me, silence is reflection. For me, silence is where I go to create and to be thoughtful. And in this instance, I have been more thoughtful than I've ever been, and I don't feel prepared yet
Mm-hmm.
to speak, because I do I do feel MLK is my father. He's my ancestor. And I don't know what he wants me to say yet. And so I've been very quiet, and that's been really hard.
Mm-hmm. There are so many things that I want to enhance and add reflection point onto. I think the first thing that comes to mind is I'm curious if you feel like, as part of that guilt, my curiosity wants me to ask, do you feel like as a Black woman that there's a pressure in which you think you're supposed to perform this experience, or experience this experience, not even perform it, but like
No,
express
you're
this experience differently?
yes, and I don't think that that was a Freudian slip. It's true. It is. I think that there is in general, culturally, I think that there is a sense of presentation
Mm-hmm.
of how we present. So growing up, in a way, I was taught to present in a way that assimilated.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught to be safe, and in order to be safe, you couldn't really be seen.
Right. And speak out. And of
No,
course, definitely not be angry.
definitely not.
Right.
Um, and so I'm at a point in my life where I'm learning to where I'm dismantling that
Yeah.
and looking for the gifts inside of it, and also the truth. And as of where I sit today, that truth isn't is that my experience is very different than the experience of many of my peers, and the experience of many of my loved ones, and that positions me differently. But
Mm,
yes, I do feel like there's a great expectation, and the judgment that I feel may not be personal, but there is definitely blatant, blaring judgment for how people
mm,
are showing up,
mm.
specifically on these public platforms where people are very quick to point fingers and crucify.
Yep.
Uh, and because I'm so vocal, because I'm so outspoken, because I'm so present with the things that I care about, I think at times I feel that my silence is loud.
Mm. I can see that. I
Yeah,
can see
like
that.
when I'm not participating, it feels very loud. Like, well, where's
But
Mo?
no, right.
What do you have to say? And I'm like, well, I have a lot to say. I just can't say it here right now because it's going to be taken out of context. And I'm sorry, but I need more than 140 characters, or 10 minutes, or a 10-minute IGTV to get that point across. And I need different points of view. And you need to know what my background and where I come from, and I need to know your background and where you come from, and we need to peel back the layers and understand each other's trauma and each other's privilege, and dissect that, and in some ways not criminalize it, because isn't it what we're ultimately wanting is access? And to me, privilege is having access to the things that you need in order to be who you are. That's not the same thing as oppression. It's different. You know, to have privilege doesn't mean that you have oppressed. Now, the system might be oppressive because it caters to privilege, but having privilege isn't inherently bad. I want my kids to have that. I want you to have access. I want everyone to have access. I want us all to have access and equity and the capacity to fulfill our dreams and hopes and desires. And it's not something that we can't microwave this. We can't just like, this isn't an instant. It's very, very multi-layered. And I guess the question that if I were to ask a question to society at this moment is are we really ready for the change that we are asking for? And at times my genuine belief is that we're not. My genuine feeling is that we are, if we were looking at the stages of a conversation or the stages of grief or the stages of life, that we were at the stage where we were wanting to express more than wanting to evolve. And you have to do a lot of work to evolve. We have to do a lot of work to transform, a lot of work. And at this moment, I know I'm like, we get in and we do the work, and a lot of people so many people are doing the work. But where you are in that work, I think shifts where who you should be speaking to about about where, like, the leadership of it is like, are we really in position? Like, I can say I took a step back because I was able to say, I'm not in position to speak to certain people's pain. I'm not in position to, I'm not qualified. I'm qualified to speak about my experience. I'm qualified to articulate what I see and observe and understand, but I'm not actually qualified really to get in here with you and dissect this until I become more educated. I don't feel like I have enough information or enough experiences. And I'm really sad in some ways for this generation, because young people have always been at the forefront of change and at the forefront of these movements. But I really feel like this generation, I'm not sure how equipped we are in terms of the real capacity to. It's very traumatic to go on social media and watch people take their last breath. And I'm afraid that we are traumatizing one another.
Oh, I think we are. There's no doubt.
More than we are helping. That scares me. And I've been more passionate about not perpetuating the trauma than I have been about healing the hurt at the moment. It's like, if I can't help, then I at least don't want to keep hurting.
You know what is oh man, you've really opened my thinking to a lot of things right here. So there's like a couple things that I'm urgently wanting to say. I think the first is that I'm so grateful that you took the risk to have this vulnerable a reaction and response to my questions, and that you're introducing this into our larger cultural conversation, because I can imagine how scary that might be. I can imagine also, as a public figure, not, let alone your race, but your status in our culture and your profession and the high profile nature of that. We tend to demand quite a bit from high profile figures to have something to say publicly. So I think anytime I hear anybody, whatever their position in life is, say, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to look within before I speak outside of myself, is really important. Especially for something as complex and layered as privilege and race and systemic violence and systemic oppression and issues that these are new languages for a lot of people to say.
Absolutely.
Conceptually need to get taught effectively, understood effectively, and then activated. But that all doesn't happen, as you said, in 140 characters or an IGTV video. The other part of this is that our medium right now, because we have been locked down in a pandemic and encouraged to stay inside, which, by the way, we are still in a pandemic. People are still dying to the tune of thousands of people a day, that we need to honor that, but it has exacerbated the isolation. And so social media has
Yes.
become, at the time of a very heightened political social movement moment, it's become our lifeline to each other. And on
Yes.
one hand, that can be very powerful to stay connected. But to your point, and I understand and embrace it wholeheartedly, it betrays the complexity of conversation and the personal evolution and processing that is required. We go
Woo.
immediately into uh canceling, which is a whole other conversation. I believe some people absolutely deserve to be canceled,
Right.
and some deserve a chance to process openly, messily, and like we all do, right? Like none of this is going to be a perfect evolution, to your point. But the work is the work is the work. It goes back to the same
Mm.
conversation we had in the beginning about like linking trauma and self-esteem and the socialization of systems for girls and women around what it's going
Right.
to take to feel loved. Like all of these are big concepts that we've been born into, raised into, whether consciously or not. I would love to at a different time pick up the conversation that you have around privilege, because I think obviously as a white woman and any white appearing people and any person that's been looking at their relationship to privilege, it's it's a deeply sobering moment for some who've never looked before. It's a deeply
Mm.
eye-opening moment. And then for others, they've been very aware of it, but they don't actually understand impact of
Mm.
what that's done. But privilege is a really important conversation for us to have. But the even I think the most one of the things that you said that just really really struck my heart was, we are allowed, you are allowed, I am allowed, others are allowed to take their time to process what needs to get processed, not for public consumption, but for true personal growth.
Right.
When we have
That
more
part.
people doing that, we can create the systemic change that we're looking for. When we react, perform, do the things we think are in line with what people say we need to be doing, we're betraying the work.
Right. The I've had more profound conversations in my direct messages than I could ever post. I've
Yeah.
had people reach out to me from South Carolina and tell me how they want to raise their children differently, and to really inquire in a sincere way. Did I ever hurt you at
Mhm.
school? Did I ever, if there was anything that I ever did that actually impacted you negatively? And then I have to sit with myself and think about the time that I was in the car with someone and they did say the N word and I didn't say anything, and I have to like sit with myself and ask myself why, and really, really, really sit with that and sit with how much I wanted to be liked and how much I wanted to be accepted by someone, that I would betray myself and I would betray my family, for these ideas, and that takes time, and I also, I it really bugs me. I want people to have compassion for everyone, for people in white skin who are waking up to this today. That is still challenging. People are like, I don't need your white tears. And I'm like, we need all the tears. Like, it is okay. It is okay for that to be shocking. We all have a heart. We all have this heart that's beating inside of us. And I think it's really dangerous when we come to the table and we don't allow people to bring their feelings. And I get that people that we need to listen more. And I understand that I understand the concept when where people are coming from, when it's like, hey, don't make this about you, this is about something else. I get that. At the same time, we have to grow into this. We have to grow into this new way of being. The industry, looking at the roles that I've played over time, looking at the roles that I went out for, looking at the roles that people write, that I had to have a whole mental shift now about, what I was pursuing and how, what I'm perpetuating in the characters that I play, you know um the choices that I'm making, being a lot more conscious
Mm,
about those choices, recognizing that I'm not just an actor, but I'm an activist and an advocate, and no matter how much I'm able to
mm,
be someone else, this is still what you see, and what do I want this black face to be? And at some point, I want us to be able to be and do all things, but at this moment, when there are so few opportunities and it has been very limited, being very thoughtful about how the choices that I make impact the next girl and the choices that she's making, when I accept less than what I'm worth, when I take roles that are stereotypical, when I play a character in a stereotypical way. And then at the same time, there are people who really are like these characters, and to not shut that part off
Yeah.
either, and to be like that there's not girls who talk like this, because there are girls who talk like this. It's just that that's not how every
Right.
person is and experiences themselves. And I think, like, to your point, on an individual basis, it's so important that we are actually doing the work. I look at people that are posting constantly. I'm like, have you actually made one phone call?
Mm.
Because your one phone call to the police station, your one phone call, your one email, your one letter could be profoundly more impactful than every post that you put up saying to do the things that you're actually not doing. And if I'm not actually doing it, yes, of course, share, so that, because you could impact the person who is, but also check yourself. Like,
Yeah.
have you had one hard conversation? Have you had one genuinely vulnerable moment? Have you allowed someone to penetrate your heart, and to, have we had the conversation about why don't touch my hair? Or are we just like, don't touch my hair and you should just know? How would I know? When would I know? Where would I learn this?
Mhm.
It really comes to me back to class and education, oftentimes more than it has to do with race. A lot of times it's where were we educated? What did we learn? And
Mm.
do we have enough empathy and compassion for one another to guide each other to the truth, and or to set certain boundaries and say, hey, I'm in my own healing right now. Your feelings are valid, but right now this is the space that I need to be in
Mm.
order to process. So I need a minute, and I can't really address that. But there feels to be a lot of aggression
Mhm.
right now, and a lot of anger, all understandable. Um,
Agreed.
However, as a warrior of peace and love, I it's what I still choose,
Mhm.
always, first, foremost, in every way I can.
I was going to ask you, in the industry, there have been a lot as a result of some of these conversations. There's been a lot of Black actors and actresses who've come forward to say what their experience was like on a predominantly white set, and things that
Mm,
perhaps didn't feel like they could articulate as publicly before for fear of industry backlash, right? And we know that that's
right.
an unspoken rule for women of color, like, and for men of color. Like, it's this, there is this world in which you need to code switch in many ways to get the things that you need
Mm,
to do in this industry. We're still not at equitable representation, either in race, gender, or otherwise. But I'm curious, and I'm not interested in the naming names part, but I'm curious, in your experience, if you mentioned the experience of you being in a
mm.
car and hearing somebody use the N word and needing to reckon with yourself as to why you didn't speak up. Have you been reflecting on your experience professionally, in our industry? And do you relate to any of the stories that people have been sharing about feeling othered, or feeling microaggressions or macroaggressions,
Hmm.
in that way? I'm curious if that has resonated for you as well.
There was a meme that went around
Mm.
about the black best friend,
Mm.
and as the black best friend, that one was tough,
Yeah. What was
because
tough
I
about it?
it was essentially about how there's often a black character there are black characters that are cast as the best friend to help support the white storyline.
Yeah.
And I recall at some point in my career deciding, like, oh, I wanted to be the best friend.
Mm.
It was the role to aspire to, because I obviously wasn't going to be the leading lady unless it was a black project.
Right.
And there's sort of a stigma around black projects, which is often because of budget. Truly, like, that's really what it comes down to, is like, is having the budget uh, to support a production, and not being an equitable, um, that not being equitable where money goes and where money comes from to do projects, and it's a business at the end of the day. But that one really, it didn't sting in a way, but it was very enlightening to
Yeah.
me to kind of recognize that I had moved into a place of aspiring for something that I had never really seen represented that particular way. Also, when it comes to finances, getting paid less than my white counterparts,
Yep.
and my male counterparts. So double hit
Yeah.
as a black woman, to um, to look at these things and to look at just the hair, for instance. I got to really have a lot to do with Taylor Mckessie,
Mhm.
the character I played in High School Musical, to do
Yep.
with her appearance. And I remember being on set and getting my hair done for the film in a very Caucasian hairstyle. And it was very poorly done before we were on set. And so I said, well, give her headband, but don't just give her one for
Mm.
today. Make that part of her character then, that she wears matching headbands. That way we have time for me to go get it fixed, but then just like incorporate it into the character of her instead of saying, why doesn't she have braids? Because she would.
Yeah.
Or why isn't her hair just natural? Because it is.
Hmm.
And to look back on that and to think of how, and gosh, I mean, Taylor Mckessie, I will forever be grateful to have gotten to portray that character, because
Hmm.
she really does speak to the hearts and minds of so many young girls and Black girls and everyone. To get to see, this was, I got to play Taylor before we had the Obamas. So,
Hmm.
it was like the original, like, Obama kid. Um, um, but to look back and to think that I didn't feel that I had a voice, and that I
Sure.
didn't feel that I had a place, and more than that, I don't place that on someone else. I don't place that on what was presented towards me. I think about how I thought about myself, and the fact that I didn't think that that was beautiful. I
Yeah.
didn't think that that was pretty enough,
Right.
or universal enough, or approachable enough. And anytime I'd come back from vacation or get ready for pilot season, the number one thought that I had for pilot season was, what should I do with my hair? Let me watch commercials to see what's in. And my skin wasn't light enough to do the mixed girl thing, but I would always try to find something that was um, was acceptable, or that was on trend with what kind of Black we were.
Right. And specifically how white productions were portraying that, or people in that space. Yeah. Yeah. But, I think this is important to note and to mention, because I could find parallels in this story to, obviously, to, larger bodied, fatter bodied women who are looking,
Mm,
who also, you absorb that is what systemic isms do. You absorb the
mm,
predominant thinking. So you aspire to the level of which has been set, right? So
right,
you get to play the best friend,
right.
this girl gets to play the comedic, interlude, and nobody is centered around the story of their life if they aren't prescribing to the systemic whatever is there. And we do orient around whiteness and thinness and able-bodiedness and heterosexuality. Like, that is how we define normal, and then everything else gets moved around it. And I think what our industry is doing, slowly but better, has been really unlocking those systems to say,
Yes.
why aren't we funded in this way, for individual performers and artists like yourself to be able to feel empowered with the right language and framework and empowerment to speak up at a costume fitting, to speak up at a
Right.
hair meeting, for producers to be better educated, for casting folks to be better educated. Like, this is, again, the work of the work. It's not just one person's job to make that whole experience different. Everybody's got to come with it. I mean, shoot, that's a huge part of my business model, is working with
Hmm.
those systems to help them educate on what's missing. It takes all of us to do that. But I think it's the same in business. I think women have aspired to be a male version of a CEO, instead of what it
Right.
looks like to be a version of you as a leader, as a woman, which will look different from the typical way men have led, by the nature that
Yes.
we're not men, and there's something different. So I appreciate the unpacking and the recognition that there were times you didn't advocate for yourself, because you had a drink of the Kool-Aid and kind of like figured out, like,
Absolutely.
well, I'm at least I'm here. And I think we all do that. Anybody who's been marginalized or oppressed, I think, coming from the outsides, we all settle for what has been established as status quo for us, what we have
Yeah.
been told is accessible and
And I
successful.
want to be super clear that I own that. I don't place that elsewhere. I, even as you were speaking, I was thinking about Kenny and how he really just made such an amazing point to cast Casey Stroh as the head
Mhm.
cheerleader in the third movie
That's right.
intentionally.
Yep.
He made very intentional choices, and at the last callback for High School Musical, it was myself and two girls of Asian descent, because the smartest girl in school. So, he really, I really want to commend
Yep.
that. And I think sometimes we are given opportunities and we're like so happy to be there and so grateful for the
Yeah.
moment, that we don't actually really understand that we get to make it who we actually are, and that we don't need to take that step back and say, oh, well, I'm so happy to be here, thank you. Instead, we're like, oh, great, I'm so happy to be here. This is what it's like to be me.
Correct.
This is what that actually looks like.
If I could summarize our whole conversation and sort of begin to like put a finer point on it, although I feel like you and I could have like an entire 50 episodes on this, is that this is all an evolution and a revolution at the same time. We need the small, baby moments, and we need these big moments. And it is also progress over perfection. That everything we
Yes.
are talking about right now is individual, and it takes time. And I'm curious, just to kind of put a fine point on this program, when we talk about loss, which we've been talking about, calling it many different names throughout this program, whether it's professional heartbreak, personal heartbreak, loss, physical loss, emotional loss. The idea that everything dies, including our physical bodies, the idea that everything dies in order to change, including our lives around us. Is there something in this season of your life that you are tapped into now to urgently live towards more? Something that you're finding, specifically, that you're like, you talked about that awareness as a girl, right? I'm this age, and I have so much more to do. As I'm talking to Monique Coleman right now, what is your urgent living call to action for yourself in this moment?
Well, I turned 40 2 months from yesterday, and I am urgent about doing and being all the things that I have imagined myself as. So I don't know what it takes to be a director, but I'm going to direct.
Good.
I don't know what it means to be a producer exactly, but I'm going to produce. And I'm no longer going to hide or think that I'm unqualified to do the things that God has placed in my heart to do. I'm going to do them because I can and I should. So I will. Because one of my favorite quotes is Wayne Dyer. He says, do not die with your music still in you. And I know that I am so passionate about young people. I'm so passionate about women, but I had this revelation recently that the thing that's fueling me has started to drive the ship. And now I want to make sure that I am letting the art and the things that I want to create drive, and allowing my advocacy and my purpose to fuel, because I never want the thing that I was doing and the reason why I was doing it to become the backup. It's not meant to replace it. I want to live. I'm going to live in full expression for myself.
And so it is.
And so it is.
I knew when we got reconnected, we would be just as aligned as we always are. I am right there with you. My urgent living is about expressing all the unexpressed ideas, so that if today were my last day,
Yep.
that I knew that I had said the things I needed to say to the people I love. I have shared the things creatively that I need to do, that my music is let out into the world, to quote our buddy Wayne. But most importantly, it is to have these conversations to normalize these more nuanced expressions of being human. And you, my friend, are a stellar human, and I love you madly. And I'm so grateful for this time.
I love you too. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did I tell you, or did I tell you? Monique Coleman is the real deal, a sweet and spiritual friend that I'm so proud of for the level and depth of where we went in this conversation. I think what I'm so moved by was her trust and her willingness to share where she was at in the middle of a process, not waiting until she knew how she felt or was certain about how she felt and then kind of coming out and sharing it. She really shares in the process, which, by the way, when you're a high profile figure and somebody who's got a public platform, that can be really scary, because you don't get a chance a lot to be in process, to be figuring things out. And the part of the conversation, there's like two major parts that I was most, I think, drawn to and really felt like inside goosebumps about. The first one was, of course, the shared language that we had around childhood trauma and sort of the way young children, based on a variety of circumstances, whether they had young parents, whether they had immature parents emotionally, whether they had experiences, accidents, or otherwise that sort of propel you into a state of adulthood before you're too ready to do that. And the pressure that it can put on people, but especially of girls and women that we work with, that think perfection is the way out of all of that responsibility. Like, when I get good grades, get this job, have this achievement, then I'm not going to feel any of this burden to take care of all these people or to take care of all these things. Trauma is a tricky one. Trauma and childhood trauma, as we're learning and discovering and researching, really lays a blueprint for a lot of us in our lives in how we adapt as adults, how we create relationships, and certainly as it relates to the female empowerment space, and for women, unpacking trauma and re-identifying with yourself and learning how, in some cases, to reparent yourself, to heal yourself, to mother yourself. So the part of the conversation with Monique where we talked about tenderness and kindness and nurturing, I want you to think about that for those that are listening, whether you had that in your home growing up, whether those were values that you were anchored around living a good life, about learning how to be kind and tender and loving to yourself. A lot of us, maybe a majority of us, don't start to unpack that and work on that until later in life. We just realize we didn't have that growing up, and it causes a series of issues. And none of this is actually good or bad. I've stopped looking at these things in a binary way. What I'm interested in as a provocateur of this conversation is talking to people like Monique and others that you've heard on this show, how all of us have our stuff that we've grown up with. All of us have the things that anchor us in our themes in adulthood and the way that we pursue life. And that's what living a good life is about. It's about unpacking and understanding those things so that you can build a life that you love on your own terms, not carrying the baggage of your past, not carrying the unfulfilled dreams of your parents, not carrying the pressure that you might have from society. So I really loved that part of this conversation. And then as we ventured into talking about real-time issues like the systemic violence and racism conversations that we're having in this country in a more public fashion, like the conversations around changing in the entertainment industry with representation and diversity, I really appreciated Monique sharing her perspective where she is looking at and unpacking on her own, not necessarily publicly on social media, her relationship to privilege. As a Black woman, growing up in an elite private school, entering into the world of Hollywood, having access to some things that others don't, but still being marginalized within the communities that she worked in. It's complex. It's layered. And when she talked about her relationship to privilege and pain and loss and growth, I think a lot of you probably found yourself in those stories, but I appreciated her, especially being a public figure, admitting that she's taking some time to be quiet, to be figuring out what she thinks and how she feels and how she can most be of service to these very big conversations. And the through line in that part too is about social media and about whether or not it was the safest platform of which to have these conversations and maybe even the most effective to start a revolution. That I'd love to hear from you on and how you think social media plays into some of these bigger conversations. I can see it both ways. I can see it the way we talked about, which is it is a very insensitive, unforgiving platform to be in process around. People go quick to judgment, quick to anger. It's easy to be anonymously nasty to people. It's not always a safe place. We know that. However, in a time where we are all being asked to stay inside, to refrain from some of our daily external activities, social media has become a needed lifeline for so many people to stay connected in the world. So I'm torn with that relationship, but I understand that one of the things she brought up that I think is really true is that no matter what, no matter whether you're online or offline, a public figure or not, we as people need a chance to understand things and heal from things and make informed and healthy decisions. And we don't owe that to anybody on anybody else's time frame or timeline. And we don't have to do it in a prescribed character count, and we don't have to do it in a certain number of minutes on a video. This is real life impact, and we are real humans trying to figure out where we fit in the world and what kind of world we want to create. So I very much valued that candid part of our conversation. You don't get that a lot with people who also make a living being a public figure, that, you always feel the pressure that you have to have everything figured out. And she said probably the biggest truth of all is that we don't. We're all in evolution. And these conversations on this show, this is what I call the work of the work. It's the messy stuff. It's the sloppy stuff. It's the stuff that doesn't feel perfectly tied up in a bow. And that's okay, because we're here on this show to unpack it, to look at it a little differently, and to offer people a place to normalize some of these conversations. So I hope you found yourself in our convo from today. I'd love to hear what you think and how you're feeling after listening to that. Please reach out to me. You can reach me at podcast@jesswiener.com. You can certainly find me on any of these social channels that you're watching or listening to me now. And most of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to have these conversations with you. I'll see you real soon. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Wiener. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jesswiener.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jesswiener.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.